Okay, there's some other issues we want to talk about. We've touched on them before, was the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, right? And if you remember or recall, there are two specific, and they're called titles, that we deal with. Title I deals with the access of employers to make reasonable accommodations for their employees. Typically, that 15 employees is the target number. Now, this is kind of misleading. What this is telling you is at 15, there could be random audits. If there's less than 15, they still will abide if someone calls in and says, I think there's a violation. OSHA and HUD have the same thing. OSHA and EPA have the same thing. 15 employees is like their trigger number. Doesn't mean that they won't bust a company that only has 3 employees. It just means that they don't randomly search those. There would have to be a complaint. So Title III deals with the access to business goods and public services, curb cuts, elevators, things like that. So that's the ADA. I thought I was going to sneeze. Title I, Title III. Now, the ADA also has exemptions as well. Property that is covered by the Fair Housing Act, which already prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability. So the ADA exempt houses that are covered by FHA, the Fair Housing Act, because it doesn't have to cover them since FHA, and when I say that, I mean Fair Housing Act, not Federal Housing Authority Administration, because they have a disability clause in it anyway. ADA also exempt property that is exempt from coverage by the fair housing, such as those 55 and older. The HOPA clause. You get what I'm saying? ADA exempt houses that are covered by the fair housing, because the fair housing has a disability statement inside of it. So the ADA doesn't need to cover that one. And the ADA also doesn't cover houses by older people because it's exempted from the FHA, so it's exempted from ADA as well. That's a very confusing statement. Now, there are some activities that are caused by or that can create fair housing issues. So let's cover some of these. All of these were activities that were actually promoted at one time but are now illegal. The first one's called blockbusting. Blockbusting. Blockbusting had a special name. It was called panic selling. The nickname was called the white flight, because here's what was going on. There were unscrupulous investors going into predominantly white neighborhoods and telling them, hey, the blank people are moving in. They're going to lower the value of your house. You should probably sell now and move before they, finger quotes, get here. And then they would buy their house cash at a discount and resell it. All right? It was instilling a panic in these people. That's why it was called panic selling. And it was predominantly done to low intelligent white people. That's why they called it the white flight. All right, that's blockbusting. The next one is steering. If you guide someone towards or away from a specific area based on one of these 7 protected classes, it is a violation, even if you're trying to help. When I was a Caldwell banker, have I told you this story? Did I tell someone else? Hispanic guy came into me when I was a Caldwell banker. He was like, hola. I'm like, ¿cómo está? He said, hey, man. He said, I want to live with other Hispanic-speaking people because I don't speak English. I said, let's go to Belmont, Washington. He's like, cool. He goes, let me go out to the car, get my wife. We'll come back in, look at properties. He goes out the door. My principal broker at the time comes in and goes, Raymond, you can't do that. That's a violation of fair housing. You're steering them. I said, but he asked. He said, it doesn't matter. You chose the area, whether you think you're helping him or not. So the guy came back in and he's like, hey, and my boss is like, hey, look, dude, we can't do this. You need to go to the Hispanic consulate, do your own due diligence, and then come back and tell us where you want to live. After all, geography is the one we discriminate on all the time. I want to live in the South Side. I want to live in there. I want to live in there. That's fine. And the guy said, okay, well, I don't want to get anybody in trouble, so he left. So as he walks out, I told my boss, I'm like, dude, you killed my first client. He's like, dude, saved your first lawsuit. I'm like, crap. Never thought I'd see him again. About 3 weeks later, a guy comes in and goes, oh, I'm like, ¿cómo está? He's like, I want to go to Washington and Belmont. I'm like, ta-da! But in that case, he literally told me where he wanted to be. You are not allowed to help. You can't say where they go, oh, I want to live with all the other Catholics. Okay, let's go up near Crown Hill Cemetery, up in that area, and live it. That's a violation. Now, if they come in and say, I want to live near Crown Hill Cemetery, that's fine. But I'm not steering them, even if I'm helping, even if you think you're helping. Advertising. All right, here we go. Let me get my soapbox out. I think I've got a soapbox here I can get up on. There is no way under this heaven that you cannot violate this law. There is no way to not violate this law, period. And this is where we go back to this warm and fuzzy kind of feeling that we all want to have and all want to say that we should all get along and live together and be nice. And we all get that. But yet we also all understand that when I go and I choose people to hang out with voluntarily, most of the people are well-to-do, white, male, older, Republican, conservative, gun-carrying people. Why? Because that's what I am. I know them. I speak their language. We understand each other. We have a lot of the same thoughts and ideas. Not that I've not hung out with millennials. They just don't talk to me when I do. So we even have a degree called target marketing, right? Matter of fact, Facebook, pick your target to market to. But now, listen to this. Right in the book, on page 354, the selective use of media, whether by language or geography, may have a discriminatory impact. For instance, advertising property only in a Korean language newspaper tends to discriminate against non-Korean. Well, two things. First of all, duh. If they're non-Korean, I don't think it tends to discriminate. I think it literally does. The next thing is, what's the official language of the United States? There is none. So how do I advertise in a language that does not discriminate against somebody? You buy a billboard and write all of them. Can't write them all. But that's where I'm going with this. I had a guy named Ken Yamada, was an agent of mine, was Japanese. Ken Yamada advertised in the Japanese magazine that came out of Chicago, had a lot of clients that were Japanese. Why? He spoke Japanese. Makes a lot of sense. I couldn't talk to him. There's a girl on the west side, Donna Seacat. All her yard signs are in Spanish. She deals with the Hispanic market. I can't talk to them. What about the German magazine or the German neighborhood down here? That's a German magazine. What's it called? Something Park right over there. It's not, is it called German Park? Yeah. So, and it's got a magazine that they put out. So would you put that? And how do you spell? Isn't that Farsi? The African language? I can't even spell that. So, do what? Yeah. So you got all those. So you cannot not violate this rule. We understand that we are supposed to not intentionally do that, but you literally cannot not help from it. Because there are people in the United States right now that don't speak English. You know, they're of some other descent, Hispanic, European, any of those that maybe don't speak English. So if I put an ad in the newspaper that is in English, by that definition, it technically discriminates against non-English speaking people. It just so happens that all the people spoke English when we landed here. We were a couple bullet shots away from speaking French, but the other thing I like is down at the bottom of page 354, look at that ad, that chart. Over on the left-hand side, photographs or illustrations. On the right column is not permitted, all the way down. Illustrations showing only individuals in ethnic dress, African American families, only white adults, etc. Bank One, which is now Chase, used to be the best at this advertising. If you would go into Bank One and look at all their posters on their wall, I can guarantee you almost two things. One, there's never a white male in any of them. Two, there's always at least two people that, in my personal, honest opinion, would probably never speak to each other on a general basis. Old American Indian guy talking to a young Chinese girl. They're very good at doing that because they're covering generations, they're covering nationalities, they're covering sexes, all of that. There was a builder in Maryland who built inner city buildings, who hired a billboard, who hired a model who was a black gentleman, who was married to a black wife. And coincidentally enough, guess what? They had black kids. The poster was on the billboard. He was sued by the ACLU because he was inferring that only black people lived in the inner city. And he lost to the tune of about $2 million because he used one racial ethnic race for urban houses. All right? So once again, almost impossible to not violate this rule. Appraising. Appraising. You cannot use these 7 protected classes when appraising a property. Well, if this was in the Jewish neighborhood, the house would be worth more. You can't say that. Or if this, because it's in this neighborhood, it's worth less. All right? Redlining. Literally, redlining is exactly what it sounds like it is. They used to take a map of the city with a big red marker, and they would draw a red circle around a certain area and say, do not write any mortgages inside of this red line because of those so-and-so people. That's a violation. In the mortgage world, we have a thing called reverse redlining, where they would do the same thing, draw the circle, and then they would intentionally target those people inside of the circle with high interest rate loans because they knew they were probably uneducated to understand what was going on. They called that reverse redlining. But for us, redlining is, hey, can't use that zip code because of the Martians live there. All right? Here's the biggest problem with this law, in my opinion. This is what they call an effects law, not an intent law. What an intent law means is you cannot say, I'm sorry, Your Honor, I didn't mean to offend him. the judge is going to say there has to be no intent in this. The effect was he felt or she felt offended, therefore you violated the rule. Let me give you an example. Back in the Summer Olympics, we were watching that Usain Bolt run, and a buddy of mine looked at me and goes, "Man, he's fast." He said, "But they're all really fast." And I looked at him, I'm like, "What are you saying?" He's like, "Sprinters, what are you saying?" He said, "All sprinters are fast." He goes, "I was a distance runner, never was very fast, but every sprinter, even the Germans, are fast." And I'm like, "So you weren't saying that it was a black thing?" He's like, "Oh, no, I was meaning sprinters." That's an example of his intent wasn't to be a racial comment, but somebody could have heard it and went, "Oh, that was racist." Well, I didn't intend for it. It's not an intent law. It's an effects law. How do they feel? Do they feel like you said something wrong? And you will never win that if you go to court. Hard to prove how someone didn't feel. Response to terrorism. Remember, you have to. There are new security procedures in response to terrorist attacks. It is unlawful to screen housing applicants on the basis of race, color, religion, national origin, disability, or familial status. You have inquiring whether you can screen applicants on the basis of citizen status. The Fair Housing Act does not specifically prohibit discrimination based solely on a person's citizenship. Therefore, asking an applicant their citizen documentation or immigration status papers during the screening does not violate fair housing. You could also ask someone's immigration status. Well, you're signing a one-year lease. You may have to go back at the end of your 2-year immigration or 6-month while you're here for school, so I have the right to ask that. Any questions on terrorism or those activities?